Hi everyone, and Merry Christmas. Today we're going to take a look at one of the most iconic and beloved Christmas songs of all time. This song is heard all over the place during this time of year, and almost everyone will at least recognize it, if not know it by heart. Let's take a quick listen to this popular and well-loved Christmas song.
The sun is shining, the grass is green.
Wait, not this part. Let's skip a bit. There we go.
Of a white Christmas.
This song is, of course, the well-known Christmas standard, White Christmas. But despite the song's current ubiquity and iconic status, it has an incredibly interesting, unusual, and somewhat convoluted history. Written in a place where it never snows, maybe, by a Jewish immigrant to this country, first featured in a holiday film, but not this one, which was released during the summer, and not necessarily expected to become a hit, at least by some, this song ended up becoming the best-selling single of all time, and almost single-handedly launched an entire tradition of secular Origipop Christmas songs that has supplied today's society with almost our entire current holiday soundtrack. So, given all that, as well as that weird first part we just heard, let's today take a look at the music and lyrics, as well as the history, impact, and legacy of one of the most iconic Origipop Christmas songs of all time. White Christmas was written by one of the most successful and popular Origipop songwriters ever, Irving Berlin. Berlin was actually a Jewish immigrant born in Russia who came to America in 1893 when he was only 5 years old. But he found incredible success as a songwriter and was able to write songs that seemed to not only become popular hits, but capture the feelings of society and even influence popular culture on a much larger scale than many other songwriters of the time. By the time of the release of his patriotic hit, God Bless America, in 1938, Berlin was more than just a household name, but was recognized by many as the greatest songwriter who ever lived, and a man who had the ability to capture the soul of America in song. Now, when Berlin actually first wrote White Christmas is debatable. Various accounts put the date of creation anywhere from 1935 to 1941. One version, found on the Wikipedia article for Holiday Inn, claims it was first conceived of by Berlin on the set of the film Top Hat in 1935, although tellingly there is no citation or reference for this claim, and I haven't seen any reputable source back this up. Another story, that at least has some circumstantial evidence to back it up, is that the inspiration for the song came about when Irving Berlin spent Christmas working in sunny Hollywood, away from his family's traditional holiday festivities in 1937. And other stories I've seen variously place the song's birth year as any of the 4 years between 1938 and 1941. But all of these claims seem difficult to definitively prove. Although this might not be too surprising, given that even Irving Berlin himself shared different origin stories regarding his hit song, saying once that he wrote it in August of 1938, and another time that it was first written in 1941. Similarly, where the song was written has also been subject to various theories as well. Many accounts have Berlin's location when writing White Christmas as a hot desert environment, either La Quinta, California, or Phoenix, Arizona. Although these accounts might also be apocryphal, coming about simply because of the interesting and humorous contrast between location and topic. Now, one of the reasons it might be so difficult to pin down just when and where Berlin first wrote White Christmas is due to his music writing style. He was well known for taking down various ideas for songs whenever and wherever they came to him. He would jot down lyric ideas on shirt cuffs and cocktail napkins, and think up new tunes in elevators, while shaving, even while in the bathtub. And then, he was also known as a fanatical tinkerer, reworking and revising various songs over the course of months or even years. All during this process, these various scraps of ideas or partially completed songs were stored in what Berlin referred to as his trunk. And many of Berlin's most famous songs, such as God Bless America, were reworked and revised trunk songs. And it's very possible that White Christmas went through a similar process. Now, it is true that Berlin himself once wrote that White Christmas was what he called a round song, meaning it came to him effortlessly and fully formed, and he wrote it in just 2 days. But again, his at times contradictory claims about the creation of this song leads us to believe that this just might not have been the case. An early idea for the tune of the A section might indeed have been thought up as early as 1935. Or a portion of the lyric for the B section might have come to Berlin while staying at the Arizona Biltmore Hotel. I mean, I'm just speculating, and we can't know any specifics for sure, but it's possible, if not probable, that White Christmas followed this type of process, and that, as a result, there is no one time or place that this song was created. However, there is some early evidence that points to a preliminary idea for this song, and which also shows us how different this song might have originally been. According to the book White Christmas, The Story of an American Song by Jody Rosen, the earliest verifiable reference to the song White Christmas can be found amongst the notes created for a new musical revue Berlin wanted to put on in the late 1930s. The Crystal Ball, although never produced, was intended to be a throwback to Berlin's earlier revues from the 1920s, and by mid-1938 there was actually a list of potential numbers and sketches for the show's opening act. This list, likely typed up by Irving Berlin himself, and seen here as reproduced in Rosen's book, was not terribly detailed, with such entries as short sketch with music and rhythm number. But at the end of the list, we see the first written evidence of a song titled White Christmas. Now, this of course does not mean that the song was written, or that what Berlin was thinking of even resembled the eventual Christmas classic, but it does tell us that an idea for a song with this title existed as early as mid-1938. But there are also some clues here that Rosen argues demonstrates that this version of the song was probably quite different than what we actually ended up with. The fact that it is placed last, as the finale, meant, according to variety show convention, that this would be a large, visually impressive number. And the following note, start in 1, going into full stage, meant the song would begin with a single performer, eventually being joined by the full chorus in a rousing, show-stopping number. Rosen argues that all this indicates that White Christmas, as envisioned at the time, would not be a sentimental ballad like we recognize today, but instead a parody or satirical take on such a ballad. This idea is further supported by a slightly later outline to a new show thought up by Berlin. Although the Crystal Ball seems to have been abandoned, in February 1939, Berlin created an outline for a new revue titled Happy Holiday. This show, according to the outline, was a revue to be done entirely with lyrics and music, in which the important holidays in a year will be shown in rotation as they naturally fall, each holiday as an individual item in the revue. This idea, which some sources put Berlin as having since the early 1920s, and which utilizes a similar contrivance as his earlier revue, As Thousands Cheer, was reworked a few years later into the eventual vehicle for the finished White Christmas song, the 1942 film Holiday Inn. But here it is just a simple throwback-style revue featuring only songs and musical numbers and no plot or story. But what's most interesting about this outline is the very next note Berlin makes. He writes, "The point of view will be the debunking of the holiday spirit." And at the end of the outline, although there is no reference to an actual song titled White Christmas here, he writes, "Christmas and finale of the show. This will sum up our whole idea and point of view." Again, potentially indicating that the original idea for the song White Christmas might very well have been as a satire, as opposed to the sincere, heartwarming ballad we are so used to today. But regardless of the initial theme or point of the song, these notes, written by Berlin himself, show us that at least in early 1939, there was the idea for both a song titled White Christmas, as well as a revue which would showcase various holidays, and which could serve as a vehicle for that song. But the first complete written version of White Christmas isn't actually seen until January 8th, 1940. This original dated copy, which is housed at the Library of Congress, was written down by Irving Berlin's musical secretary, Helmi Kresse, and his story of the song's origin on that day seemed at least somewhat more accurate than many of the other stories. Kresse later recalled that Berlin came into his office early one Monday morning with a newly composed Christmas song. Here it seems that Kresse's memory matches the available evidence, as January 8, 1940 was indeed a Monday. Kresse continues that Berlin, who had never learned musical notation, required Kresse to write up the song he had just finished. Berlin, as he did for almost all of his other songs, wrote both the music and lyrics to the song, but he needed help getting the music he could hear in his head and plunk out on the piano on only the black keys, written out onto a musical staff. Kresse related that Berlin stated to him when he came in, "I want you to take down a song I wrote over the weekend. Not only is it the best song I ever wrote, it's the best song anybody ever wrote." At first, Cressa was doubtful, but when Berlin began to sing the chorus, Cressa knew it really was the greatest song ever written. But there still wasn't a vehicle through which to introduce this greatest song to the public. But that problem only lasted for a few more months. In April of 1940, Berlin bumped into popular Hollywood director Mark Sandrich, who had actually directed 3 of the Fred Astaire Ginger Rogers films which had music supplied by Berlin: Top Hat, Follow the Fleet, and Carefree. Berlin wrote at the time that, "I told him about my idea of a musical revue based on holidays, and he thought it would make a perfect movie for Bing Crosby. But first there would have to be a storyline, since the revue format was considered unsuitable for the screen. I went out to Hollywood and worked on the general outline with Mark, just a thread of a story about an easygoing fellow who works only on holidays." So now, both the song and the show to feature it were well underway, but it still took a while for everything to come together. Berlin and Cressa probably continued to refine and polish White Christmas for several weeks after that initial Monday morning meeting, and the film which would feature it, eventually titled Holiday Inn and produced by Paramount Pictures, didn't begin production until late the following year, in September of 1941. Berlin ended up writing 12 new songs for the film, including White Christmas, and Sandrich was able to secure the country's top singing star in Bing Crosby and the country's top dancing star in Fred Astaire to play the 2 male leads in Holiday Inn. Now, there is some uncertainty and contradiction regarding the impression of White Christmas during early work on Holiday Inn. A common quote that arises from that time when the film's songs were being pre-recorded in Paramount's music building in the fall of 1941 is one from Bing Crosby, who, upon first hearing the song, stated, "Irving, you won't have to worry about that one." In many analyses, Bing's quote is seen as an understated yet confident stamp of approval on an eventual hit. But other chroniclers argue that this quote was just Crosby placating Berlin, as his real thoughts on the song, mirrored by many others on set, indicated that there wasn't much hope for it. Even Berlin himself, perhaps because of what others were saying about the song, was quoted as saying that, "We didn't even think White Christmas was the big song of the picture," and he instead pinned his hopes for a hit on and began actively promoting or exploiting Be Careful, It's My Heart, which was the Valentine song, a stark contrast to his earlier boasts to Helmy Cressa about the importance and impact of White Christmas. However, Berlin was nevertheless very protective of and focused on the handling of White Christmas for the picture. He worked closely with Paramount's staff arranger Walter Scharf to create the orchestrations for the song as it would be heard in the film, something outside of Berlin's technical ability. But through his work with Scharf, the latter realized how much the song meant to him. Scharf was quoted as saying, "It was as if he were going to have a baby when he was working on that song. And by the end of the process, he had to agree with Berlin that it was going to be a special song." However, this was the fall of 1941, and the film wasn't scheduled to be released until mid-1942, meaning that the ultimate fate of White Christmas and who would be vindicated in their early opinion of the song, Berlin or his detractors, wouldn't be known for almost another year. This delay upset Berlin, who stated, "I wrote Holiday Inn in 1941, and it wasn't until 1942 or later that people saw it. All that time, the songs are hidden away, and you have no way of knowing whether the songs will be accepted or rejected." This frustration might have been one reason why Berlin allowed Bing Crosby to sing White Christmas more than 6 months before the film was released, on Christmas Day, 1941, on the Crosby-hosted NBC radio show, The Kraft Music Hall. This was the very first public performance of the eventual hit, and it came at a very important time for many of the listeners. Just 18 days before, on December 7th, 1941, the U.S. had been attacked by Japan, launching the country into the global conflict of World War II. Now, at this point, there still weren't nearly as many American troops overseas as there would be just a few months later, and it's not clear how many Americans even heard this first broadcast of the song. But for those who did, it seems likely that this song might have made a more emotional impact on them than it probably would have otherwise, due to the circumstances. Interestingly, this very first recording was considered lost for many years, but now seems to have potentially popped up online. According to the website lostmediawiki.com, the recording of the song, or maybe even the entire December 25th episode, are held by the Bing Crosby estate, and that in December of 2011, an audio file of the original song was loaned by the estate to CBS News Sunday Morning, which was doing a Christmas morning special that year. On this program, a brief, low-quality fragment of the original 1941 recording was played, with some narration spoken over it. Here's a short clip of that special.
And now a page from our Sunday morning almanac. December 25th, 1941, 70 years ago today. Day one for a Christmas classic. Listen closely. Time has taken its toll. What you're hearing is Bing Crosby's radio show, and he's singing a new song from the pen of Irving Berlin, a song called White Christmas.
The site also claims that although the original broadcast version of the song in its entirety has never been officially released or played publicly since its premiere, a version of the song was somehow found and uploaded to YouTube. I'll link that video featuring the potential original version of the song in the description below, but I can't verify the veracity of that recording. Anyways, after this original broadcast version was released on Christmas Day 1941, it would be another 7 months before the public was able to hear White Christmas again. Bing Crosby recorded the first version of the song for Decca Records with the John Scott Trotter Orchestra and the Ken Darby Singers on May 29, 1942. This first version, along with the other songs from Holiday Inn, was released on July 30th, 1942, just 5 days before the film premiered on August 4th. And upon release of Holiday Inn, it quickly became apparent that critics were big fans of the film, that is. White Christmas, however, to Berlin's disappointment, was not initially singled out for much praise by critics. Although referred to in various reviews as tender and tuneful, it was not as big a hit initially as the song Berlin had been heavily promoting to band leaders, radio executives, and sheet music sellers, the romantic ballad from the film, Be Careful, It's My Heart. By July 17, 1942, more than 2 weeks before the film had even been released, Be Careful, It's My Heart was already topping the list of most heard songs on radio, according to Billboard magazine. And within just a few more weeks, the song could also be found on the list of best-selling sheet music and records. Meanwhile, White Christmas hadn't made it onto any of those lists by the end of August. But perhaps this wasn't too surprising, since it was still the summer, and White Christmas was undeniably a very seasonal song. In fact, not only had Berlin not promoted the song, many radio executives had not been allowing it to be played on the air and had not encouraged its sale. However, there were signs of its upcoming success. Those who had heard the song were apparently already gobbling it up, and as early as August 8th, music industry insiders were predicting a large public interest in White Christmas as the holidays approached. However, the spectacular rise of the song's popularity most likely surpassed even their expectations. By September 18th, the song had entered Billboard's sheet music bestseller list, and just 2 weeks later, it could be found on several of Billboard's music tracking areas. By the end of October, White Christmas was the #1 song on the Your Hit Parade radio program, and by November 5th, the song was topping almost all of the metrics tracked by Billboard. Although much of the success of White Christmas can be attributed to Bing Crosby and his iconic recording, there were other versions of the song, such as one by the Freddie Martin Orchestra, that were doing very well during this time, and by Christmas, 1 million copies of the sheet music had been sold, more than any other song in almost 20 years, demonstrating that there was more to this song than just Bing Crosby or its place in a well-received and successful film. In fact, a review of Freddie Martin's record, found in the October 31st issue of Billboard, proclaimed White Christmas one of the most phenomenal hits in the history of the music business. But why did this song achieve such extraordinary success? We've already discussed the impact of World War II briefly, and we'll delve into that more in a bit. But this song's success lasted well after the end of the war, and its popularity has hardly waned in the 80-plus years since its creation. So what is it about this song that elicits such a reaction? Why does it touch people so deeply and strike such a chord with the general public? Let's take a look here at the lyrics, music, and a bit more at the deeper meaning of the song to see if we can answer these questions. Here we see the song as it appeared in the original published sheet music in 1942. We can see that it follows the conventions of most other Origipop songs in its format. There's a 4-bar piano intro, that interesting 16-measure introductory verse, and then the chorus we all know and love. But before we get into the chorus, let's look at this funny introductory verse. What does it say, and why is it even here? Well, during the early period of original popular music, the verse was quite important and often longer than the chorus, conveying the bulk of the story the song was telling. But by this time, the verse had shrunk both in length and importance. It had become both vestigial and perfunctory for most songwriters, almost always written but very seldom heard, either on stage or film or in recordings. The intention of the verse was to set the stage for and the mood of the rest of the song heard in the chorus, which was by this time the most important part of the song. And that's pretty much what the verse does in this song. The lyrics run, "The sun is shining, the grass is green, the orange and palm trees sway. There's never been such a day in Beverly Hills, LA. But it's December the 24th, and I am longing to be up north." So, it's setting up the background to the message we hear in the chorus. It's telling us why the song's narrator is dreaming of a white Christmas. It's because he's somewhere far away where it's warmer and there is no snow. This verse matches many others from songs of the time in that it gives a bit more about the story of the song, but it also is not necessary and can easily be cut out if needed. And of course, it was cut out for the song's debut in Holiday Inn, as the story in the verse didn't match the story presented in the film. And I think the reason it's so very rarely included in recordings is that this verse actually hurts the song's overall message and makes it harder to resonate with listeners. The reason is that if we just start at the chorus, we can easily put ourselves in the narrator's shoes. The chorus starts with, "I'm dreaming of a white Christmas." And for those of us listening, we can easily turn that into, "I'm dreaming of a white Christmas." No matter where we are, we can make this song about us. Even if we are somewhere where it snows, the song, as we'll talk about in a bit, is more about nostalgia for the past than specific weather conditions. And it's such an effective song because it is so broad and almost everyone listening to it can apply it to themselves in some way. But if you add in the verse, it makes the song much more specific and takes away that universal quality. It's just a bit harder for a person overseas, or really anywhere but sunny Southern California, to apply the song to themselves when it starts with this framing device that stipulates such a specific time and place. So it's no wonder that the verse is so seldom heard. Additionally, not only do the lyrics not quite fit the mood of the rest of the song, the music is quite a bit different as well. The chorus is slow, steady, and almost hymn-like. Conversely, the intro is jauntier with triplets, some light syncopation, and 10 eighth notes compared to just one in the chorus. All of this gives us a very different musical feel between the verse and the chorus. Now, I've talked before on this channel about how some verses would hew closer to the musical style of the chorus, while others, like White Christmas, would be a bit of a departure from it, and both versions can work, depending on the song. But here, given the impact and importance of the chorus, the different musical feel of the verse feels more disjointed than it might otherwise, and Berlin himself seemed to realize this as well. In December 1942, as the song was being heard everywhere, he contacted his sheet music publishers and told them that he wanted them to cut the verse out of the sheet music of White Christmas. From now on, he said, that song goes without a verse. However, I can't find any evidence that there were new versions of sheet music sold without the verse. Again, it was so common for even the most popular songs to have short verses printed on the sheet music that no one ever sang or even really knew. It might have been a bit different for Irving Berlin, as he was somewhat of an exception to this in that many of his songs actually include the verse when sung, such as Puttin' on the Ritz and There's No Business Like Show Business. But regardless, the introductory verse of White Christmas followed the same fate as that of his other massive wartime hit, God Bless America, and has essentially disappeared, only sung by a very few artists when covering this song. Now, let's take a look at the chorus. The lyrics are so well known, I won't go over them too much here, but I do want to mention just a couple things. First, we know that it starts in the first person, which, as I discussed earlier, makes it very easy to apply to ourselves. And then, the second line, just like the ones I used to know, indicates that this dream isn't just a hope for specific meteorological conditions, but rather a wish for a nostalgic, perhaps idealized past. Finally, the song ends by changing from the first person to the second person. We've been saying I all throughout the song until may your days be merry and bright, and may all your Christmases be white. Why the sudden shift? It's because these lines are actually what is being written in the Christmas card mentioned in the previous line. We can see this by the quotation marks around those last two lines. This is also very meaningful, as it indicates that the song is not just a personal longing, but is also a wish for others to have what we don't. It reflects the giving spirit of Christmas and the fact that it is better to give than to receive. If we can't have an idealized, merry, white Christmas, we can at least hope that others do. Now, let's take a look at the music of the chorus. As we can see, it follows a fairly standard A-B-A-C form, which, although not quite as popular as the A-A-B-A form, was still very widely used at the time. We discussed earlier the simple, slow rhythm, but what about its melody and harmony? Well, it's ostensibly in the key of C, but the melody has been characterized as wandering, and, at least in the first line, chromatic. This refers to the accidentals in that first line, the D sharp here and the F sharp here, which, although we're used to them today, have a quality described as exotic and brooding. The length of the notes and their respective lyrics is also interesting. It has been proposed that most other songwriters would have emphasized the words dreaming and Christmas, but Berlin instead places the word I'm and white over the two whole notes in the first line. This again makes the song seem more personal and reflective, and imbues the idea of a white Christmas as something more than just literally snowy, but perhaps something more idyllic. And there is more beyond just this first line. Although the melody generally stays within one octave, there are a few exceptions, such as when it reaches up to this D here on the word ones, further emphasizing the idea of an idealized past. However, in the words of one analysis, despite these upward strains, the melody's progress is steadily and almost despondently downward. After one last upward climb to bright, here towards the end of the song, it drops one note below middle C, here just before the end, to give the ending a wandering, unresolved quality. The slightly melancholy feeling given off by these aspects of the melody are supported and facilitated by the harmony as well, with a few unusual or minor chords, such as the F minor here and the G diminished here, which further give White Christmas a somewhat lugubrious feel. So why is this? Well, it seems to me that the music isn't as much sad as it is yearning. Berlin was a master of merging words and music to create a certain feeling in a song, and it seems likely that Berlin felt that this music was best suited to convey that feeling of nostalgia and yearning he wanted the song to embody. The lyrics only mention past Christmases explicitly once, in the line, "just like the ones I used to know," but the music seems to convey that feeling of longing for the past much more. But then the question is, why did Berlin imbue this song with such a feeling of nostalgia and yearning? Is it just that he thought that this was a good angle for a new song and it would do well with the public as a result? That's likely, but there also might be a personal element as well. Despite the fact that Berlin was married to a Christian woman and had large Christmas celebrations with his family every year, he was still Jewish and has also been described as being an outsider when it came to Christmas. It's possible that writing a song about one of the most important Christian holidays was somewhat challenging for him, and as a result, he decided to draw upon his personal experiences of the holiday from his childhood. This might account for the more nostalgic element of the song. But there is another reason that Berlin might have infused this song with a feeling of yearning for an idealized past. On Christmas morning, 1928, Berlin's firstborn son and second child, Irving Berlin Jr., died at only 24 days old. This tragedy deeply impacted Berlin and his wife and pervaded every holiday season after. His wife and he would go lay flowers on his son's grave every Christmas Eve, and Berlin's wife is quoted as saying, "We both hated Christmas." It's possible that this experience affected him when writing White Christmas, with the result, a song whose melody, harmony, and lyrics work together to really bring out a specific feeling of yearning and nostalgia, a focus on an earlier, happier time, perhaps one which only exists in our minds, which, given that tragic experience, is completely understandable for Irving Berlin. But beyond these personal reasons for focusing on nostalgia in the song, there was also a more widespread reason why this might have been an angle that appealed to Berlin. The focus of popular culture for most of the 30s had been, perhaps in response to the Depression, the idealized wealthy elite, epitomized by, among others, Fred Astaire in many of the Astaire-Rogers films of the 30s, but in no clearer image than that portrayed in Berlin's earlier hit song, Top Hat, White Tie, and Tails. But by the end of the decade, there began to be an emerging longing in American society for an idealized, traditional, and rural past. This new focus can be seen in multiple facets of popular culture, from hit films such as Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, whose main character embodied and championed small-town traditional values, to books such as The Grapes of Wrath, which focused on the plight of the country's farmers. Additionally, Holiday in itself lays this shift out very clearly. The wealthy show business elite, played of course by Fred Astaire, who had so embodied this image over the past decade, is contrasted in the film by the more identifiable, down-to-earth Bing Crosby, who wants to leave the glitz and glamour of the city and settle down in the countryside. And of course, the film shows that that is the ideal and ultimately successful path to follow. And this entire idea is hinted at by the song White Christmas and ultimately is buoyed up by it as well. The song's music and lyrics worked together perfectly to convey this feel of nostalgia and yearning that fit the public mood at the time. And of course, all of this was supercharged by the outbreak of World War II. The first Christmas after the song was released was the first Christmas so many soldiers were away from home. To them, this feeling of yearning for home and a simpler time was so much greater than anything Irving Berlin could have predicted when writing the song. As a result, much of the song's success was fueled by members of the armed forces serving overseas during World War II. The manner in which soldiers heard White Christmas was primarily through recordings of the song, most often Crosby's version, which were played on armed forces radio and featured in jukeboxes in USO halls. Records were also sent to troops in recreation kits developed by the military, as well as in care packages from families at home. But regardless of how the song reached them, White Christmas was more than just a song to those serving, but seemed to truly touch them in a deep and meaningful way. It was particularly moving to those serving in the South Pacific and others who would have no White Christmas in warmer, humid climates. But of course, it was also appreciated by almost every soldier, as no matter where they served, they identified with the song, as it gave voice to their desire to be back home for Christmas with their families and away from the dangers of war. And of course, the war affected those at home as well, for whom the song White Christmas similarly gave voice to desires for an earlier peaceful time when their sons or brothers or husbands were back at home away from danger and death. All of this came together in a serendipitous manner for the fate of the song and made White Christmas a massive hit like nothing Berlin had ever seen before. In March of 1943, White Christmas won the Oscar for Best Original Song at the 15th Academy Awards, marking Berlin's first and only Oscar win. The song reached #1 on the Billboard chart not only that first year, but the next 2 years as well, the only song from a movie to reach #1 in 3 different years. Bing Crosby's version also continued to be such a hit that the master copy of that first recording actually wore out, and he had to record a new version in 1947. Although they tried to make this version almost identical to the original, with Crosby accompanied again by the Trotter Orchestra and the Derby Singers, there are a few differences, such as the addition of flutes and celesta at the beginning. And it is actually this copy, not the first 1942 version, that most people hear today, and that has gone on to sell 50 million copies, giving it the distinction of the best-selling single of all time. And of course, the song has also been covered thousands of times by other artists as well. And if you include all of these, sales of the song exceed 100 million copies. And the popularity of the song during those first few decades even led to an entirely new movie to be created. In 1954, 12 years after the song was first published, a new film was released, which featured several songs by Irving Berlin, both old and newly written, but whose central song was White Christmas. This film, appropriately titled White Christmas, featured the title song twice. First, early in the film, during a World War II setting, showing the real-life impact the song had on soldiers during that conflict. And then again at the end of the film in a huge Technicolor number featuring the main stars as well as an entire chorus, complete with dancing children, and a number that is almost garish and reminiscent of perhaps the earlier original idea for the song's place as a satirical finale number. I don't actually like the movie White Christmas as much as Holiday Inn, and I feel the song loses some of its charm and more personal, nostalgic feel as a result of that large production number at the end. But regardless, this film not only demonstrated the song's popularity and power, essentially serving as a basis for an entire film, but it also furthered the song's reach, as many people consider this film a Christmas classic and watch it regularly during the holidays. But not only was the song White Christmas an amazing individual success, but it also essentially created an entirely new genre of music. Before White Christmas, most Christmas songs were traditional, religious songs. But when Irving Berlin wrote White Christmas, he distinctly removed any religious overtones from his creation. This song, like Berlin's Easter Parade before it, is purely secular in tone and focus. It's likely that this shift is due to the fact that Berlin was Jewish and did not celebrate an overly religious Christmas, instead focusing, as does the song, on the more secular elements of the holiday, such as the tree, Christmas cards, and snow. Now, this certainly wasn't the first secular Christmas song, with both Jingle Bells and Up on the Housetop, written in the mid-1800s, and Winter Wonderland and Santa Claus is Coming to Town, both written just a few years previously in 1934. However, non-religious Arigipop Christmas songs were, at the time, still in the minority and fairly rare when White Christmas was released. Most popular music publishers didn't see a point in publishing a song that, according to Billboard magazine, would be played on that day alone and cleared off the retail counters the day after. But White Christmas changed all of that. After its enormous success, other songwriters jumped on the bandwagon. The following year, 1943, White Christmas was joined on the charts by I'll Be Home for Christmas, a pretty song, but also very much a White Christmas knockoff. Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas from 1944's Meet Me in St. Louis was another more melancholy wartime Christmas song released the following year, and after this, the floodgates seemed to open. Silver Bells, Sleigh Ride, The Christmas Song, Frosty the Snowman, and many, many others were released in just the span of a few years. And these songs, as well as new ones released seemingly every Christmas, now make up an entire seasonal soundtrack within this and many other countries. And it all started with White Christmas. This song, written by a Jewish immigrant who had experienced a deeply personal loss on a past Christmas, transformed from a parody of a sentimental ballad into the very thing it was satirizing, capturing and reflecting as it did so, through a feeling of yearning in music and lyric, an entire national mood of nostalgia for an earlier, simpler time, which was further exacerbated by the events of the day, as America had just entered the most deadly and widespread conflict known to man. All of these elements came together to make White Christmas an unprecedented hit at the time and the best-selling song of all time since. And on top of all of this, it essentially kicked off the entire holiday music industry. But while this song is incredibly impactful and iconic, it is also worth remembering that the message of the song is relatively simple and personal. And I hope that during this holiday season, if you can't have a Christmas that's white, it can at least be merry and bright. Thanks for watching.